Hi, and welcome to the Nonprofit Matters podcast, brought to you by #Nonprofit, the show where we tackle real, complex, and often unspoken challenges of working in South Africa's nonprofit sector. From ethical dilemmas and leadership struggles, to funding cuts, legal hurdles, and burnout, this is a space for honest conversation about what it really takes to keep doing good. This podcast is made possible thanks to the generous support of the LV and Ivy Middleton Charitable Trust. We're grateful for their partnership in helping us create a platform where the sector can reflect, share, and find new ways forward.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Nonprofit Matters podcast. My name is Helen Joannides, #Nonprofit board member and public programs and outreach archivist at the Western Cape Archives and Record Service, and I'm your host for today's episode. So today we're talking about leading with heart, nonprofit leadership and organizational design. Joining me is Seelan and Naidoo, Principal Associate of Public Ethos Consulting, and Michelle Davidson, Executive Director at EM Solutions, who are both experts and bring extensive experience and insights into this discussion. Seelan, Michelle, if you can just start us off by telling us a little bit about what you do and perhaps why you are passionate about this particular topic of nonprofit leadership and how organizations like this are structured. So, Seelan, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Helen. My name is Seelan Naidoo. I am the Principal Associate of Public Ethos Consulting. And we've been around for the past 3.5 years. So quite a new consulting firm. We only work with public benefit organizations, so that's government, NPOs, universities, churches, that sort of thing. We don't work with private sector organizations because we believe that the public and private sectors are fundamentally different in terms of their logics and what's required of organizations that seek to operate there. It's been interesting, and I hope that I've got something of value to share with you and with whoever listens to this podcast. I'm keen to share some thoughts and have a chat.
Great. And Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself to us?
Thanks for the welcome, Helen. I've been consulting to nonprofit organizations for over 20 years. My background is in financial management and information systems, which is what we leverage with nonprofits at EM Solutions. We help you get unstuck when your growth has outpaced your systems. When something isn't working properly, then we use a sort of specific process optimization lens to help you to unblock the root cause of what is holding you back so that you can reach your full potential. We believe that people are at the heart of everything we do. It's our number one company value, is people. And so we don't lead organizations, we don't lead projects, we don't lead processes, we lead people. And people have hearts, and people are real, and they're soft and they're squishy, and they have ups and downs and, good days and bad days. So I am really excited to discuss some of these real issues that engage with people as who they are, things that we've encountered over the years, and challenges that people really need to understand and get to grips with. So looking forward to the discussion.
Right. Thanks so much. So let's get to some of those questions that have come from the #Nonprofit community that gets into the soft and squishy a little bit. So Seelan, we'll put the first one to you. So you go ahead, and then Michelle, feel free to come in as well. So here's the question. We've tried everything to keep our organization alive. The funding hasn't come through, but the work hasn't stopped because it can't. We serve a community that needs us, and we've kept going on the backs of volunteers, tiny donations, and sheer willpower. I'm doing almost everything myself from home with minimal overheads. I'm so busy delivering the work that I don't have time to fundraise, and without funds, we can't change how we operate. It's a constant cycle. I'm exhausted. But every time I think about letting go, I feel like I'd be abandoning the people who rely on us. How do you know when it's time to stop? When do you say, we've done all we can, even if the need is still there. Seelan.
Thanks, Helen. I mean, that's such a, I can imagine that there are thousands of NPO founders. One person shows that struggle along like this. And I think it's a really tough situation to be in. And I don't want to be simplistic in responding to that, because it's a real tough conundrum. A while back, I wrote an article called "To Keep Going or to Wind Up," where I deal with some of this, and it might be useful to share a link to that article. So the way that we've captured this particular situation is to call it an existential crisis for the organization. So it's a question about, whether we continue with this organization or not. Now here you'll note how the what we think of as the organization, the NPO, and the person running it gets conflated. And that's the first, I think, little bit of a separation that needs to happen. The organization is not the same. It's a juristic person, that stands on its own. Whereas the director who's exhausted, or the NPO person that's running this organization is exhausted, is conflating his or her state of being with that of the organization. And I think that is particularly with the one person show, or the two or three people working together. It's very easy to do that. Now we say things like the organization is nothing more than the people in that organization, and that's absolutely not true. Okay. So organizations are made up of they include computers and desks and processes and histories and boards and fiduciary duties, laws, financial statements. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes into making an organization, and it's not just down to the people who are there. So for me, the first thing is, if I were offering a bit of therapy to the person who wrote this, who's expressing this frustration, it would be,
sounds like they need it
to make that sort of separation. But it's very real, I get why people tend to conflate themselves with the organizations that they run, but they are different. So if the individual human being there, the warm-blooded human being, says, I'm exhausted, I'm not sure that I can continue with this, then the question becomes, could someone else do it? That's a logical sort of question, right? Mm-hmm. But only when you make that separation. Now, another way out of this conundrum is to say, can we hook up with other NPOs? So we're struggling, right? We're struggling running a little, let's call it a soup kitchen in Somerset West somewhere, in a community. We feed 100 people a day. That's great. It's absolutely important. I mean, there's a real issue with food security, right? But there are thousands of other soup kitchens. Are there ways that one could combine one's efforts? Now, just to give an example of that sort of thing, I've recently done some work with people working in the food security side of things in Cape Town. And what they do is they supply the ingredients to about 70 soup kitchens. So they've specialized. They've said, look, it's important for us to get protein into those soup kitchens, right? And healthy ingredients and so on. And what they've done is to specialize in, finding, gathering the right sort of ingredients and distributing that to the soup kitchens. So that takes the load off the soup kitchen. Their focus is now food prep and food distribution, right? But are there other ways in which one could use the community of NPOs? So I think there are very powerful network effects. If NPOs could start working together, now here is where the human frailties need to be dealt with. Ego. This is my baby. I founded this thing. This is my initiative. Those are not things that NPO leaders say out loud, Okay. But I think there are some repressed sort of problems of ego and so on that need to be dealt with. We can do better by working together. Trust me on that. And then thirdly, we get to then the very tough question of how does one craft a gracious exit? So you've tried talking to other NPOs, everyone's in the same boat, we're all struggling, and you've now really hit the end of the road. I don't believe in complete self-immolation. You should commit suicide for a good cause. I don't see how that makes any sense. You can also live to fight another day. Perhaps shut this down. It's got too much inertia. It's run into trouble. It's okay to stop. Firstly, it's entirely okay to say this has run its course. I cannot continue anymore. But the question then is, how do you let your beneficiaries down in a gracious sort of way? What's the gracious exit is something that you need to talk about. And there, the most important factor is timing. Don't wait until the last 5 rand has left your bank account, and now you announce to your beneficiaries that there will no longer be a soup kitchen from tomorrow. I think that is kind of irresponsible. So a little bit of foresight is important. And I think many NPOs are so involved in the daily struggle, in the struggle of the present, that they find it very hard to say, what does it look like 6 months from now?
The collaboration, the separation of the organization and the person, and the gracious exit. I think these are all really hitting the nail on the head. I think I'm going to open it up to you, Michelle, to just add anything, other strategies or other things that come to your mind. But perhaps a follow-up question that Michelle or you, then Seelan, can come back for would be to think about what are some of the avenues or the mechanisms where NGOs, if they want to, or NPOs want to find collaborators, how do they go about doing that within their communities? How do they find the people that have the common values, the common ground? So, Michelle, for you to take either of them, or Seelan can come back and address that.
I want to just confirm what Seelan said. He started off with collaborating with others, and that was definitely something I would have recommended right off the bat. So totally agree with that. And we're actually quite a small community. If you're in a space, using Seelan's soup kitchen example, you know who the vegetable suppliers are, you know who the other people are in those spheres. It doesn't take much of a Google search to find out who else is working in your communities. There are also people like the Cape Chamber who have work within geographic areas, who would know who's operating in those spaces, who's engaged with in the type of work that you're doing. So that also leads me on to the next point that I think is important to understand, is that the need will always be there. We are never going to be rid of the poor, rid of, those beneficiaries and everything be in this idyllic utopian society. There is always going to be a need. And so shouldn't have this savior mentality that I must save everybody. I must be the only one who can do it. There are others who are engaged, who are working in that space, and the need is always going to be there. So, to kill yourself for the need, and using Seelan's example, is silly, because the need is really going to be there forever. However, in all things, not just in an exit strategy, we do need to consider how can we equip those beneficiaries so that we are not, as the nonprofit, continuously giving to them the solution to their problem, because then you need a person who's providing the solution continuously. But in a way of working where it's collaborative, where it's supportive, where it's equipping, so that over time you actually are needed less and less, because those people are able to actually provide the support, whatever that is, for themselves. And I mean, it's a long-term goal, but focusing on, the root causes of the issue rather than just putting a Band-Aid over it and killing yourself, exhausting yourself, let's be a little less dramatic, by constantly applying that Band-Aid. But also, in any business, in any nonprofit, there is no sustainability in a one-man show. If you want to actually grow, if you want to be around beyond that individual, you have to have other people in the mix. And typically you'd want your leader and somebody who's sort of the second, who picks up all the pieces, who makes the things happen, somebody who's the operations guru, who's going to take the big ideas and actually make them a reality. And then your third person is normally some kind of admin person who's able to take off that low-level, easy, routine stuff off the plates of those people who are actually trying to build something stronger. Because if you are so focused on delivering services and not fundraising and not bringing in the income to deliver those services, you're not going to last. You have to have the dual head. And it's difficult to do that as an individual because it takes different skill sets, it takes different focus. And so, you're constantly sort of task switching between these big picture things and, making sure there's ink in the printer. And so it's much better to actually have different people for different roles. And they don't have to be full-time. They don't have to be like permanent staff. We don't have to have this team of 20 people whose salaries you're having to pay. There's all this shift towards what's called the gig economy, where you people working from home, you have virtual assistants, you have outsource various levels of support. So you can actually build up quite a big team of different skill sets quite inexpensively by accessing the time and resources that you really need and not looking at full-time employees. So I think it is very important that the one-man show is not going to last. You really have to work on the business. How are you going to actually make this thing work and building into that sustainability right from the beginning?
I just want to pick up on talking about the personal and the one-man show, and then moving it more towards from that to a more the organizational structure for our next question for you, Michelle, because I think you started to talk about this a bit, that everyone talks about the flat structure in our organization like it's a moral virtue, but in reality, people are saying it can be chaos, that there's no clarity about who's responsible for what. And as you're saying, the directors are doing the admin and fixing the printer, and there's also the feeling that nobody wants to be the boss, and that actually that can just be messy and inefficient, and it's supposed to be like collaborative and whatever, but you can't make decisions, and that somebody actually needs to be in charge. So the question is, why do so many nonprofits romanticize flat structures, and how do we build leadership that's accountable without being authoritarian? And I think we started to talk about different roles and stuff. So maybe we can just address that.
Yeah, I think it's a misconception. People are trying to create a flat structure because they're very aware of power dynamics. That's something we in the nonprofit sector are cautious about, in that we don't want to replicate what's perceived as negative within the corporate structure, where you have this very hierarchical, authoritarian, dictatorship sometimes structure, that there's a right way and a wrong way and you better get on board. Where in a nonprofit setting, we're more collaborative, we're more people focused, we're more understanding of those dynamics. And also there's a high sense of justice and advocacy within a lot of organizations, which then comes out in how we engage with power, in power structures. And so the flat structure is perceived as less, it's less sort of putting your power over on somebody else, because we are not reporting in such a hierarchical structure. And as you said there, no one wants to be seen as the boss. The reason you don't want to be seen as the boss, because you don't want to be the one telling everybody what to do. You don't want to be the one who's dictating how things should go. And then people feel unempowered, right? But that's actually the wrong way of looking at the flat structure. If you can address the real issues and try and engage with what the underlying thing that you're trying to engage with, right? So the power is not about who's reporting to who in that structure. You can, if you have a very flat structure, you can also end up with power dynamics that are at all levels. You can have passive aggressive people employing power within their structure and within their role and within the things that they're working with. You end up with things like lobbying, because every time especially if your flat structure involves collaborative decision making, you then have people who are lobbying for their own decisions and stuff and their own preference. And actually, before you even come to the collaborative discussion, people have picked sides. And so you can polarize the organization by not defining exactly what you want to achieve out of this flat structure. You create these subtle power dynamics when you're trying to eliminate them. So the way that what you're actually looking for is you need clearly defined roles and responsibilities, and then delegated decision making. Because when we look at the flat structure, what we're trying to get to is a more collaborative decisions. But what you actually want is that everybody within their role and responsibility has authority to make decisions that relate to their area of engagement. So, your admin clerk can choose which type of ink to use, the same printer example, which supplier they have for the ink. They have authority to make the decisions within the scope of their role. They don't need to have it passed up the chain because only the big boss can make all the decisions.
So, Michelle, I'm just going to stop you there and just bring in Seelan, because would you agree, Seelan, that some of these things are actually about the underlying issues and dynamics in an organization more than the structure per se?
Yeah. I mean, I agree that role clarity is probably the most important point here. And role clarity in the context of a matrix organization. So this idea of, the hierarchical type arrangement, I would imagine would not suit most NPOs, given the sort of the way that they work, their resources and so on. But we must be careful not to skirt the question of leadership that's coming out in this particular question. And you got to then, so what's the role of leadership, right, of an NPO? And a nice way to think about that is to think of the leader not as the one who tells others what to do, but as the one who integrates what other people do. So, for example, the leader might say, look, you decide what ink to put in the printer. Okay. But I, as the leader, want to encourage you to stop printing so much. Okay. So do you see that there's a kind of behavior, that set of behaviors that need to be integrated to make that organization make sense as a whole? Okay. And there's this very interesting bit of, I don't want to get into a lecture about it, but this difference between integration and differentiation. So differentiation is the way that we do divisions of labor in an organization, the role clarity, the way we break up big tasks into smaller tasks. Okay. But those have to be integrated again so that they fit with the mission and the values of the organization. And that's why we have missions and values. Okay. So the value that we're going to be efficient says, don't print when you don't have to. Do an electronic document. But if you do have to print, you've got you're empowered to figure out how you lay out the document and so on. So it's that balance between leadership is fundamentally about balancing the need to integrate the organization as a whole, yet understanding that the efficiency principle requires that we break up what we do.
I want to just add to what Seelan's saying about the values and the mission of the organization. And I think one of the misnomers of the flat structure is that it lends itself towards collaboration. People want to have more involvement in decision-making process. However, decision by committee never works, never. So what we're actually looking for is collaboration, okay? And one of my clients has a saying, and I really like this, and it says, nothing about us without us. So what you're wanting to get to is that everybody is heard, everybody's perspective is considered. People who are engaged with the real issue give their feedback on whether the solution is going to work or not, and their insights from that, rather than a high leadership making decisions without consulting those who are actually engaged on the face of whatever the issue is. So that's collaboration, is once you actually understand, you've got comprehensive understanding, so that whoever's role it is fully equipped to make the decision. Allowing everybody to decide, we have to have consensus. That's just inefficient and messy and becomes a real problem because you're trying to build consensus towards something. You're always going to have one or two people who disagree. You're always going to have people who I understand your perspective, but I don't think that's a good idea. So then I think the other part of it is around accountability, because we want to know, are we making good decisions? Are the things is our behavior good? Are we performing in accordance to our roles and responsibility? And that's what your hierarchy gives you. It gives you a default accountability to your supervisor. You have performance appraisals. You have job check-ins. You have all of that sort of built into a hierarchical structure. So it's possible to do it in a more flat structure, but you have to be very explicit around who you're accountable to, who is monitoring your performance, how is that communicated. There has to be a much greater level of transparency so that you are all, that there is accountability within each other and that you're bringing issues to the floor when they arise, and that things are addressed. Because otherwise you end up with bad behavior, poor performance, and nobody taking that leadership role to hold people to account, to actually measuring up to the standards that you want to set as an organization.
And that focus on leadership kind of leads us into our next question, because that really relates to one of the not so pleasant tasks of a leader. So this question is about funding cuts, and a leader who's been asked to help to lead a restructuring process that will result in staff layoffs, including some really dedicated, long-serving team members. So this question says, I understand the need, but I also feel like I'm betraying people who've given so much. How do you let people go with integrity and kindness when the whole process feels so cold and corporate? So, we're going now into some of the roles of leaders that they have to bite the bullet on and that are not so pleasant. So, Seelan, do you want to take that? And Michelle, just jump in any time.
Yeah, again, very tough decisions around restructuring. And specifically, the question that's being posed here is, how do you let people go with integrity and kindness? It is possible. I don't think apart from people like Jack Welch, I don't think anyone relishes this sort of decision. But it does happen that there are times when you've got to restructure. Okay. And typically restructuring, people tend to think of restructuring exclusively in terms of the people. How many do I keep? How many do I let go? Who goes? Do I use a first in, first out or last in, first out type of approach? Those are all quite sort of mechanical takes on dealing with the staffing that you need. Now, before you let people go, and again, there's a sort of binary approach to things. Either I employ you full time or I let you go. That's a false binary there. There are many options in between. You could say to people, we can't afford everyone full time. Perhaps some can go part time. Perhaps you could go shorter working hours, 4-day weeks, 3-day weeks, project-based work. So there are many ways in which it might be possible to reduce your payroll, reduce your full-time staffing, using other ways of contracting people before you actually let them go. Because there's a lot of memory, there's a lot of skill that you might want to retain. And then again, to talk about, and I'm trying to make this decision less onerous on the leader. And of course, there are going to be times when you've got to let people go. And then it's the hard choices. You've got to think about the programs that you run, which are the programs you want to focus on. So rather than starting the decision with who do I keep and who do I let go, it's to start with which parts of our mission will we focus on. And that's going to help you decide who stays and who goes. Very important in these sorts of decisions around restructuring is to make sure that you've got somebody checking your ethics, in the way that you're approaching those sorts of decisions. It's very important to do that. We all have blind spots. And it just helps to have somebody to check you in terms of the way that you're approaching your staffing decisions, especially when it's around letting people go. And then, kindness is one thing, but you want to make sure that people can land on their feet even when you let them go. So do you have a proper, are you going to pay people 2 weeks of salary per year of service, for example? That's the minimum requirement in terms of retrenchment. And that's so often restructuring can be quite expensive. Okay. So if you've been running for decades, and you want to let people go, that cost up front could be quite high. So you've got to take account of that. But yeah, there's just no easy way to deal with that sort of thing. But if you approach restructuring, at least do it in a systematic way. You've got to go through all the motions. You've got to plan it well, design it well, make sure you've covered all the bases. Have you considered all the options? So these sort of knee-jerk type things where people wake up in the morning, get out of bed and decide, I can't afford 12 people in my NPO. I've got to let 2 people go. Walk into the office Monday morning and call 2 people in and let them go. That's not how you do it. Okay. That's not a process imbued with integrity or kindness. So avoid that.
If you're really going to do this with integrity and kindness, communication has to be your number one plan of action. To the nth degree, communicate beyond what you think is reasonable. Where we're at, why we got here, how we got to this position, what's the next steps, what the things are. And part of communication is listening. It's listening to the suggestions. It's listening to the emotional space of the staff who are needing to go. It's being real about the tough emotional aspects of this. Who gets to go, who goes, but also who stays. It's very hard from an emotional point of view to be the one who is is okay, and that people are leaving, and that you have to deal with that grief and that loss, but you also have to deal with the guilt that it's not you. So that's the one side. The other side of the transparency thing is just being honest, being real. It's tough on everybody. It's not something that we want to do. It's not something that we've looked forward to. It's not. And also because of, corporates, if you start looking at layoffs, it's typically with a profit motive, which is quite difficult to understand and to empathize with. It's never that case for nonprofits. If there's anybody who needs to go, it is really because everything possible has been done and it's just not enough. And so being real about the difficult situation is how you do it. That we're all in this together and it's not a us and them situation. That's definitely my takeaway from this one.
Okay, so our next question is also about leadership, and it's saying that, but from the other side of the coin, it's saying that leadership doesn't seem to understand how much invisible work happens just to keep things running, the admin, the emotional labor, the things that don't show up in KPIs. Without all this background work, the whole system falls apart. We're committed to our mission, but the pressure to perform without the right systems and support is wearing everyone down. We want to speak up and ask for structural change, more realistic expectations, better workflows, investment in our operations, but we're scared to be seen as complaining or just being bad at our jobs. How do we advocate for what we need to do our jobs properly without being dismissed as negative or resistance? And how can we make the case that invisible work is still real work to people who don't necessarily understand about how much goes into what we do?
I think the easiest way to answer this question, which is how do we make the invisible work visible, is to go on leave. To actually take 2 weeks off, hand over to your boss, and very quickly your boss will realize exactly what it is that you do, how much work it actually is, and all the things. So that when you come back from leave, they're like so grateful that you're there and that you're back and all that kind of thing. And then you can have a conversation.
And you hope everything hasn't exploded.
Fallen apart. Yes. Well, also, from an overachiever, I can tell you that the things that I hold together and try and make sure that nothing falls apart, when you actually take leave, you realize actually some of those things could be dropped. It isn't the end of the world. So it's very good, particularly when you feel like the pressure is on you and you're holding the whole thing together, is to actually take yourself out. And that's good for you as an individual and your own rest and process, but also good for the team to see what it is you do and what help you reassess what the job is. I think then following on from that is really to understand exactly what is the issue, really define what is the root cause of the issues that you're dealing with, and then evidence. You have to build a case, because we can't just say things like, oh, my work is stressful, nobody ever understands me. We have to really get down to the nuts and bolts if you're going to communicate it. What is the real problem? Here's examples of it. Here's how it shows up. And even if the examples are quite nebulous and emotional and maybe not like hard evidence, like I've got an email proof, but at least you're building this weight of an understanding, you're building a case. But then in part of your case has to be solutions. Because if you just say, I am like drowning here, and don't offer any solutions, then leadership are not going to take it forward, because they don't want to have to come up with the ideas and the solutions for you when they don't even know what's going to work for you and what's not going to work. So really looking at it as, how do I make it easy for leadership to say yes? If you have all the groundwork, you have all the evidence, you have all the solutions, you have the case, you've mapped it all out, all they have to do is go, okay, run with it. And there you go. Answer solved. If you make it that the responsibility is shifting the monkey from you to your leader, who's now got to do the research, build the case, make the decisions around that, then nothing's going to happen.
I think that makes complete sense in terms of taking ownership of it and really putting your case together. So we're coming to the end of our time together. So I just wanted to give both our guests an opportunity for some final thoughts. So Seelan, if you want to give some of your final thoughts, and then you can come in with yours, Michelle.
Thanks, Helen. And I'm trying to find ways to be succinct and to put put things into some nutshells. The first thing I'd like to say is that you lead with your heart, but also with your head and with your hands. Okay. So it's not just about leading with heart. If I can just, play around with the topic a little bit. You also lead with your head and your hands. And it's how you sort of combine these things that's important. Some parting thoughts for NPOs, given the very challenging environment in which all of you work. I don't think anyone's been spared. Okay. The first thought I want to leave you with is that you've got to think about organizational inertia. The stuff that you're doing and continue to do. What is it that determines that? Is it just because you did it last year that you're doing it again this year? Okay. And the building blocks around organizational inertia for NPOs is NPOs work on the basis of programs and projects. Okay. How do you choose those programs and those projects that you've been doing? So this, the concrete example is of the NPO that I'm working with now, works in Khayelitsha, been around for 20 years. And they've come up with new, very useful, very good programs over time. They now have 18 programs: early childhood development, food security, food gardens, skills training, and all that sort of stuff. Now look at how that spread continues. Now you started the sewing class last year, okay, and you feel that you must keep going with the sewing class this year, otherwise you're doing something wrong. But I think that's the wrong way to approach that sort of decision. So think about organizational inertia. Now the question is, how do you choose which programs to do and which to shelf, perhaps, or to change? You've got to go back to the community, to your beneficiaries. You want to go and reassess, do some community-based research that allows you to assess what it is that those beneficiaries really need. Now, what we're busy doing, actually, because that very problem has come up, we've got too many programs. Which ones do we focus on? And we are now doing community-based research using the lived realities lens. So we're going back to beneficiaries and saying to them, what is your lived reality in terms of vulnerability? What does it mean to be vulnerable in Khayelitsha? Okay. What are the dimensions of vulnerability? And then this particular NGO will go back and say, are we responding to what people are telling us? And that's the basis for then saying the 18 programs that we have, we can consolidate into 5 programs that speak directly to the actual lived realities of our beneficiaries. Okay. And that allows you to then, by allowing your programs and projects to die, you allow the organization to survive. Okay. And I think that sort of strategic flexibility, that kind of review, needs to happen on a regular basis. And just keep asking yourself, what is it that determines what we do now? Is it because I saw a call for funding, that we've now ended up doing a sewing class? You see, what drives what happens in this organization? And I think that kind of strategic intentionality needs to come back to the board, to the leaders in the organization, and all the people who work there, in a much more intentional sort of way.
So that brings us to the end of today's conversation. A huge thank you to our guests, Seelan and Michelle, for sharing their time and insight with us. This episode was brought to you by #nonprofit with support from the LV and Ivy Middleton Charitable Trust, whose contribution makes this work possible. If you found this discussion helpful, please share it with your networks and keep an eye out for future episodes where we'll continue to explore the big questions facing our sector. Until next time, take care and thank you for all that you do.